I used to think the most dangerous people in the world were the ones everyone feared. Then I met a man who smiled when I insulted him. The first time I saw Vincent Moretti, I did not know who he was. If I had, I probably would have kept my mouth shut. But that has never been one of my talents. It was a cold Thursday afternoon in Chicago, and I was sitting inside a crowded neighborhood cafe 2 blocks from the apartment building where I lived. The place smelled like fresh coffee, cinnamon pastries, and exhaustion. At least that last part might have just been me. I had spent the entire morning arguing with the supplier for my bookstore, dealing with a broken heating unit, and trying to figure out how I was supposed to pay another unexpected maintenance fee that had somehow appeared on my monthly expenses. Life had a funny way of kicking people when they were already down. My best friend Megan sat across from me stirring cream into her coffee. She had been listening to me complain for nearly 20 minutes. "You need a vacation," she said. "I need a winning lottery ticket." She laughed. "That too." I looked out the cafe window. Across the street, 3 black luxury sport utility vehicles rolled to a stop beside the curb. The sight immediately caught my attention because people actually moved out of the way. Not because anyone asked them to. They simply did. Megan noticed too. Somebody important. Or somebody who wants everyone to think he is important. The front door opened. A tall man stepped inside. Dark coat, tailored suit, calm expression. The kind of confidence that did not need to announce itself. Conversations throughout the cafe seemed to soften. Not stop completely. Just lower. As if the room itself recognized him. I did not. He took a seat alone near the back corner. No bodyguards followed him inside. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to draw attention, which somehow made him stand out even more. Megan leaned slightly forward. "Do you know who that is?" "Should I?" Her eyes widened. "That is Vincent Moretti." The name meant nothing to me. Okay, she repeated. "Claire, everybody knows who Vincent Moretti is." I shrugged. "Apparently not. Everybody." Megan lowered her voice. "He owns half the city. People always say that about rich men." "I am serious." I glanced toward the corner table. Vincent sat quietly reading something on his phone while a server placed coffee in front of him. There was nothing particularly impressive about the scene. He looked like a businessman having an ordinary afternoon. "He looks harmless." Megan nearly choked on her drink. "You cannot say things like that." "Why not?" "Because of who he is." I rolled my eyes. "See, that is exactly the problem." Megan sighed. "What problem?" I sat back in my chair. People giving powerful men automatic respect. My frustration from the entire week suddenly surfaced. Especially men who build their reputations by making everyone afraid of them. Megan immediately glanced toward the corner table. "Lower your voice." Instead, I raised it slightly. "No, I am serious. I hate Mafia men." The words left my mouth before I could reconsider them. Silence did not fall across the cafe. But it came close. Several people looked in my direction. Megan covered her face with one hand. "Claire." "What?" Then I noticed something. Vincent Moretti had looked up from his phone. For the first time, our eyes met across the room. I expected annoyance. Maybe anger. Maybe the cold arrogance people always associated with powerful men. Instead, something unexpected happened. Vincent Moretti smiled. Just once. Small. Amused. As though I had said something genuinely interesting. Then he returned his attention to his coffee. And somehow that smile unsettled me far more than anger ever could. The smile should not have bothered me. That was the ridiculous part. I had said something rude about a man I did not know. And instead of reacting the way most powerful people probably would, Vincent Moretti had smiled and gone back to his coffee. End of story. Least it should have been. Instead, I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about it. "You are staring into space again," Megan said as we left the cafe. "I am not." "You absolutely are." We stepped onto the sidewalk where the cold Chicago wind immediately reminded me that spring was still weeks away. Across the street, the black sport utility vehicles remained parked at the curb. The sight made me roll my eyes. "I still do not understand why people act like he is royalty." Megan looked horrified. "Because people enjoy staying employed. That is dramatic." No. You are dramatic. I laughed despite myself. Fair point. We parted ways a few blocks later, and I continued toward the building where I lived and worked. The first floor housed Bennett Books, the small independent bookstore my aunt had left me 5 years earlier. The upper floors contained apartments, including mine. The building was old, stubborn, and constantly finding new ways to require expensive repairs. In other words, it was exactly like me. By the time I unlocked the bookstore door, darkness had begun settling outside. I switched on the lights and immediately noticed a folded envelope resting on the front counter. My stomach tightened. I recognized the logo before I even opened it. Another notice from the property management company. Wonderful. I tore it open and scanned the page. Then I read it again. My frustration quickly transformed into disbelief. The building owner was considering selling the property. Potential redevelopment options were being evaluated. Tenants would receive additional information soon. I lowered the paper slowly. You have got to be kidding me. The bookstore had been part of my life for years. It was more than a business. It was family history, memories, home. The possibility of losing it felt like someone quietly removing the ground beneath my feet. I spent the next 2 days trying not to panic. That plan failed completely by Saturday morning. Every customer conversation seemed interrupted by thoughts of the letter. Every ringing telephone made my heart jump. Every creak in the old building suddenly sounded ominous. Around noon, my friend Sarah stopped by the store. You look exhausted. I am considering a career change. To what? Professional lottery winner. She laughed. Still worried about the building? Very. Sarah walked beside me toward the front window. Maybe the new owner will be reasonable. That sentence has never appeared in human history. She opened her mouth to reply, then stopped. Claire. What? Do not turn around immediately. I sighed. Whenever somebody says that, I immediately want to turn around. Too late. I looked anyway. A black vehicle had just stopped outside. The driver stepped out first. Then another man. Then the rear passenger door opened. My stomach dropped. Vincent Moretti stepped onto the sidewalk. Perfect. Exactly what every stressful week needed. More stress. He was dressed much like before. Dark coat. Impeccable suit. Calm expression. Yet somehow the entire street seemed to notice his arrival. People glanced toward him. Shop owners looked through windows. Conversations slowed. Vincent, meanwhile, appeared completely unaffected by the attention. His gaze moved briefly across the storefronts lining the block. Then it landed directly on mine through the bookstore window. For 1 second, neither of us looked away. The same small smile appeared again. Not arrogant. Not mocking. Just strangely amused. Then he continued walking down the street. Sarah stared at me. Why did he smile at you? I wished I knew. Because something told me that smile was about to become a problem. The problem arrived on Tuesday morning. Problems usually did. They never knocked politely. They simply appeared and expected your full attention. I was unlocking the bookstore when my phone started vibrating. The screen showed Sarah's name. The moment I answered, she did not even say hello. Have you seen the news? My stomach immediately tightened. That depends on how much damage the news is trying to cause today. Claire. Her voice carried an unusual urgency. Turn on your computer. I hurried behind the front counter and opened my laptop. Within seconds, I found the local business article everyone seemed to be sharing. The headline alone nearly made me drop my coffee. Historic Northside property acquired in private sale. My pulse quickened. No. I opened the article and scanned the details. The address matched. The photographs matched. Every awful possibility I had been worrying about suddenly became reality. The building had officially been sold. Tell me I am reading this wrong, I said. Sarah remained silent, which was answer enough. I closed my eyes. Who bought it? Another pause. Then she said the name. Vincent Moretti. The bookstore seemed strangely quiet after that. The old clock near the register continued ticking. Customers walked past outside. Cars moved along the street. Yet all I could hear was that name repeating inside my head. Vincent Moretti. Of course it was him. Because apparently the universe had decided my life needed more complications. By lunchtime, the entire building was buzzing with rumors. Mrs. Henderson from the second floor arrived carrying enough anxiety for 3 people. "Do you think he will raise the rent?" she asked. "I do not know." "Do you think he will sell everything?" "I do not know." "Do you think we should panic?" I considered the question. Probably not today. That answer did not seem particularly reassuring. The truth was that I was worried too. This building was home to dozens of people. Families, small businesses, retirees, students. It mattered. Around 3 o'clock, another envelope appeared beneath my office door. My heart sank immediately. Slowly I opened it. The letter inside announced a tenant meeting scheduled for Thursday evening. Attendance encouraged. Ownership transition discussion. My frustration returned instantly. Ownership transition discussion. Corporate language always sounded harmless right before creating disasters. Thursday arrived faster than I wanted. Nearly every resident attended. The meeting took place in the building's small community room. Folding chairs filled the space. Nervous conversations echoed from every corner. Then the door opened. The room fell silent. Vincent Moretti entered without ceremony. No dramatic entrance. No speech prepared in advance. Just calm confidence and that same unreadable expression. He wore a dark suit that somehow looked more expensive than my entire bookstore inventory. Everyone watched him, including me, especially me. Vincent stepped to the front of the room. His gaze moved across the crowd before stopping briefly on mine. There it was again. That small amused smile. As though he knew something nobody else did. "Good evening," he said. His voice was calm and surprisingly warm. "I understand many of you have concerns." Several people nodded immediately. Vincent placed a folder on the table beside him. "I would like to begin by clarifying something." The room became completely still. "Nobody is being asked to leave." Relief spread visibly across several faces. Vincent continued. "No rents are being increased." This time actual murmurs filled the room. Confused murmurs. Surprised murmurs. Vincent waited patiently before adding one final sentence. The sentence that made every person in the room stare at him, including me. "In fact," he said calmly, "I purchased this building because I wanted to keep it exactly as it is." The room remained silent for several seconds after Vincent finished speaking. Nobody seemed quite sure how to respond. People had arrived expecting bad news. Higher rent. Eviction notices. Renovations that would force them out. Instead, the man everyone feared had just promised the exact opposite. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand first. "You are not increasing rent?" Vincent shook his head. "No, not this year. Not next year either." More murmurs spread across the room. Confused relief replaced panic. I crossed my arms and watched him carefully. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Not dangerous. Just impossible. Wealthy people did not spend millions of dollars preserving old buildings out of kindness. At least not in my experience. Vincent answered questions for nearly 30 minutes. Every response was calm, direct, surprisingly reasonable. When the meeting finally ended, residents gathered in small groups discussing what they had heard. Some looked relieved. Others looked suspicious. I happened to belong firmly in the second category. Before I could talk myself out of it, I walked directly toward Vincent. Several people noticed immediately. A few even stopped talking. Vincent was reviewing documents when he sensed someone approaching. He looked up. That familiar smile appeared again. Claire Bennett. The fact that he knew my full name instantly annoyed me. Vincent Moretti. His expression suggested he found my tone amusing. "Can I help you?" "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you are planning to tell me the truth." One of his associates standing nearby looked uncomfortable. Vincent simply slipped the folder closed and gave me his full attention. "What truth would you like? Why did you really buy this building?" The question hung between us. Vincent remained silent for a moment. "I already answered that." "No," I shook my head. "You gave everyone else an answer." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "And you want a different one?" "I want the honest one." The room around us continued emptying. People drifted toward the exits. Yet Vincent seemed in no hurry whatsoever. "You think there is a hidden motive?" I think people do not spend that kind of money without expecting something in return. That is a fair observation. Thank you. You are welcome. My frustration grew. You enjoy this. Enjoy what? Being mysterious. To my surprise, he laughed softly. The sound caught me completely off guard. I assure you, Claire, my life is far less interesting than you imagine. Nobody with 3 black sport utility vehicles has an uninteresting life. That earned another faint smile. Noted. I stared at him. You still have not answered my question. Vincent glanced around the room. Only a handful of people remained now. Then his eyes returned to mine. Perhaps because you are asking the wrong question. Then what is the right question? For the first time, something shifted in his expression. The amusement faded. Not entirely. Just enough to reveal something more serious beneath it. The right question is why you assume the worst about me before knowing me. The words landed harder than I expected. Because men like you usually earn that reputation. Men like me. Powerful men. His gaze never left mine. Interesting. What is? You seem determined to dislike me. I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped, because he was not entirely wrong. Vincent reached for his coat. For what it is worth, Claire, I did not buy the building because of profit. There it was again. The statement that made no sense. Then why? I asked. Vincent slipped on his coat and started toward the exit. Halfway there he paused and looked back. The smile returned one more time. Because some things are worth preserving. Then he walked away. I stood frozen in the middle of the room watching him leave. And for the first time since meeting Vincent Moretti, I found myself wondering if I had misunderstood him completely. For the next 2 weeks, I tried very hard not to think about Vincent Moretti. Unfortunately, Vincent Moretti seemed determined to make that impossible. It started with the repairs. One Monday morning, a construction crew arrived before sunrise. By lunchtime, they had already fixed the broken front entrance that residents had been complaining about for years. 2 days later, the ancient heating system finally received upgrades. By Friday, new lighting appeared in the hallways. The following week, several damaged windows were replaced. Everywhere I looked, problems that had existed for years suddenly disappeared. The strangest part was that nobody had asked for publicity. No banners. No announcements. No articles in the newspaper celebrating some wealthy benefactor. The work simply happened. Quietly. Efficiently. As if somebody genuinely wanted the building to improve. I hated how much that bothered me. You look confused, Sarah said one afternoon while helping me organize new inventory in the bookstore. I am confused. About Vincent? I sighed. Everybody keeps asking me that. Because everybody keeps noticing you thinking about him. I pointed a book toward her. You are not helping. Sarah laughed. You expected him to be terrible. I expected him to be exactly what people say he is. And I glanced toward the front window. Now I am not sure. That uncertainty followed me everywhere. The more I observed, the less the rumors matched reality. Mrs. Henderson stopped by the bookstore almost every day with updates. The elevator was repaired. The security cameras were upgraded. The leaking pipes in the basement were finally replaced. Every conversation ended the same way. Nobody understood why Vincent was spending so much money without asking for anything in return. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon, something happened that changed everything. I was closing the bookstore when I noticed a young mother standing outside beneath the awning. She looked upset. Beside her stood a little boy clutching a backpack. They were tenants from the 3rd floor. Before I could step outside, a black vehicle pulled to the curb. Vincent emerged holding an umbrella. I froze near the front window. The mother immediately looked embarrassed. Vincent spoke with her for several minutes. Calmly. Respectfully. No cameras. No audience. Eventually the woman began crying. Not from sadness. Relief. Vincent handed her an envelope. She looked shocked. Then grateful. The little boy hugged him without hesitation. Vincent smiled and knelt briefly to say something I could not hear. A few moments later the family walked away. I stood there staring through the glass. Confused. Curious. Completely unable to understand the man. The next morning I found Mrs. Henderson in the lobby. Do you know what happened yesterday? I asked. Her face brightened immediately. The family on the third floor? Yes. Their son needed medical treatment. They were struggling financially. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened? Mrs. Henderson smiled. Apparently somebody helped them. Somebody. We both knew exactly who. That evening I sat alone inside the bookstore after closing. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The old building felt warmer now. Brighter. More alive. My gaze drifted toward the street outside. For the first time since meeting Vincent Moretti, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had been resisting from the beginning. Maybe the man was not hiding selfish intentions. Maybe the rumors were wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Then I noticed an old newspaper article sticking out from a stack of donated magazines near the counter. A photograph immediately caught my attention. Vincent stood beside several community leaders at a charity event from years earlier. Curious, I pulled the article free and began reading. By the time I reached the final paragraph, my heartbeat had quickened. Because buried near the bottom was a detail that raised an entirely new question. Vincent Moretti had been connected to this neighborhood long before he ever purchased the building. The article stayed on my desk for 3 days. I read it more times than I wanted to admit. Every time I reached the section about Vincent's connection to the neighborhood, I found myself slowing down. According to the piece, he had funded community programs here nearly a decade earlier. Quietly, anonymously in some cases, the article mentioned scholarships, renovation grants, and support for small businesses. None of it matched the image people seemed eager to believe. None of it matched the image I had believed either. By Sunday afternoon, curiosity finally defeated pride. I closed the bookstore early and walked 3 blocks to the local historical center mentioned in the article. The building was small, tucked between a church and an old bakery. Inside, shelves of records and photographs filled the room. An elderly volunteer greeted me with a smile. Looking for something specific? Maybe, I said. Do you have information about Vincent Moretti? The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly. That is a name we hear occasionally. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin archive folder. Most people are surprised when they read these. I sat at a wooden table and opened it. For nearly an hour I examined photographs, newspaper clippings, and community records. The deeper I looked, the stranger everything became. There were pictures of neighborhood fundraisers, scholarship ceremonies, renovation projects. Vincent appeared in only a few of them. When he did, he looked younger, less polished, more approachable somehow. Then I found a photograph that made me stop breathing for a second. It showed a group of volunteers standing in front of a newly restored community center. Among them was a familiar face. My father. I stared at the image in disbelief. My father had died years ago. Yet there he was, smiling beside a much younger Vincent Moretti. I quickly checked the date. The photograph had been taken nearly 15 years earlier. My pulse accelerated. The volunteer noticed my expression. You recognize someone? My father. She leaned closer. Then that explains it. Explains what? A knowing smile appeared. Your father and Vincent worked together on several projects. Blinked. They knew each other? Quite well, from what I remember. The room suddenly felt smaller. Are you sure? Absolutely. She pointed toward another article. Your father spoke highly of him. I looked down and found a quote preserved from an old newspaper interview. My father's words stared back at me from the page. He described Vincent as a man who cared more than people realized. A man who believed neighborhoods mattered. A man worth trusting. Frozen. Because if there was one person whose judgment I trusted completely, it was my father. The volunteer left me alone with the records. Minutes passed. Then nearly an hour. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Why had Vincent never mentioned any of this? Why had he bought the building now? Why had he smiled every time I challenged him? As evening approached, I returned the folder and stepped outside. The sun was beginning to set across the city. Orange light reflected against windows and rooftops. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. I almost ignored it. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. I hope the archives answer some of your questions. My heart immediately skipped. There was no signature. None was necessary, because somehow I already knew exactly who had sent it. And for the first time since meeting Vincent Moretti, I realized he might know far more about me than I knew about him. For 2 days I stared at that message and did absolutely nothing about it. Which sounds responsible until you realize I spent those same 2 days thinking about it every waking minute. I hope the archives answer some of your questions. The sentence followed me everywhere. While shelving books. While making coffee. While pretending to listen to Sarah explain why I should simply ask Vincent what he meant. Because normal people communicate, she said. Normal people do not mysteriously know when I visit historical archives. Fair point. By Wednesday afternoon, curiosity finally won. I sent a reply. One simple question. How did you know I was there? His response arrived less than a minute later. Because I recommended the archives. That answer only created more questions. Another message appeared before I could type. If you would like the full story, dinner tomorrow evening. Public restaurant. Your choice. I stared at the screen, then immediately put the phone down, then picked it back up, then put it down again. Sarah watched the entire process. You are going. I am absolutely not. You are already deciding what to wear. Unfortunately, she was right. Thursday evening arrived with embarrassing speed. I chose a quiet Italian restaurant near downtown because it felt neutral territory. Public. Comfortable. Safe. When I arrived, Vincent was already there. Of course he was. The man somehow looked composed in every situation. He stood when I approached. Claire. Vincent. Thank you for coming. Do not thank me yet. The faint smile appeared. Fair enough. Dinner began awkwardly. Then surprisingly normal. We talked about books. Chicago. Small businesses. Community projects. Nothing dramatic. Nothing mysterious. For nearly an hour, Vincent behaved less like one of the most powerful men in the city, and more like someone I had known for years. Eventually I placed my fork down. Okay. You promised answers. Vincent nodded. I did. The restaurant noise faded into the background as he leaned back slightly. Your father was one of the best people I ever knew. The statement caught me completely off guard. You really knew him? Very well. His voice carried genuine respect. He helped me long before I deserved it. I remained silent. Vincent continued. 15 years ago, I was trying to rebuild parts of this neighborhood. Many people wanted nothing to do with me. But my father did. Your father judged people by their actions. A small smile touched his face. He taught me that reputation and character are not always the same thing. Hearing someone speak about my father that way created an unexpected ache in my chest. Why did you never tell me? I asked softly. Vincent looked directly at me. Because I wanted you to form your own opinion. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then another question surfaced. The one that had been bothering me for weeks. How much do you know about me? Vincent exhaled slowly. More than you probably realize. That is not reassuring. It is not meant to be alarming. Then explain. His expression softened. Years ago, after your father passed away, there was a scholarship fund for local students. One winter the fund was nearly canceled because donations disappeared. I frowned. I remember that. A 17-year-old girl organized a bookstore fundraiser and saved it. My heart stopped. How do you know about that? Vincent smiled. Not the amused smile I had come to expect. Something warmer. Something more personal. Because I was there. The entire restaurant seemed to disappear around me. What? You never saw me. But I saw you. He paused briefly before adding the sentence that changed everything. Claire, I noticed you long before you ever noticed me. For several seconds I simply stared at him. The restaurant around us continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Glasses clinked. Conversations drifted through the air. A server carried plates past our table. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of the last few weeks quietly rearranged itself. You were there. I finally asked. Vincent nodded. I attended the fundraiser. I do not remember seeing you. You were busy. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Very busy, actually. I tried to remember that winter. The bookstore had been crowded. Volunteers had packed folding tables into every available space. We had sold donated books, homemade desserts, and raffle tickets. Hundreds of people had come through. "Why would you even notice me?" I asked. Vincent looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "Because everybody else was focused on the problem." He paused. "You were focused on helping." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. That was a long time ago. Not for me. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that arrives when both people are trying to process something important. Eventually I leaned back in my chair. "So you bought the building because of a fundraiser I organized as a teenager?" Vincent laughed softly. "No." "Then explain it to me." This time he did not avoid the question. "After your father passed away, I stayed connected to the neighborhood from a distance. I kept track of the businesses he cared about, the community projects he supported." His expression grew more serious. "Including the bookstore." I felt my pulse quicken. "You knew about the bookstore?" "For years." "Why?" "Because your father believed it mattered." I looked away for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, city lights reflected across wet pavement. The evening rain had started again. "When I heard the building was being sold," Vincent continued, "I learned a development company planned to purchase it." I frowned. And their proposal included luxury renovations, major rent increases, and the removal of several small businesses. My stomach dropped. "Including mine." "Including yours." Suddenly everything made sense. The urgency, the timing, the purchase itself. "So you stepped in?" Vincent nodded. "Yes." "Because of my father?" "Partly." His answer came too quickly. I noticed. So did he. For the first time since I had known him, Vincent seemed uncertain. The realization surprised me more than anything else. "What is the other reason?" I asked quietly. His gaze held mine. "You." My heart immediately betrayed me by beating faster. Vincent continued before I could respond. "Claire, I spent years hearing stories about you." "Stories?" "The bookstore owner who stayed open during snowstorms. The woman who organized literacy programs for children. The person who never stopped helping her neighbors, even when money was tight." I shook my head. "That sounds exaggerated." "It sounds accurate." The warmth in his voice made it impossible to dismiss. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Vincent reached inside his jacket and placed a worn envelope on the table. "There is something else you should see." Carefully I opened it. Inside was a photograph. An old photograph. The bookstore. My father. Me. I could not have been older than 17. We were standing outside during that fundraiser years ago. I stared at it in disbelief. "You kept this?" Vincent's expression softened. "Some things are worth preserving." The same words he had spoken weeks earlier suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. And in that moment, sitting across from the man I had been so determined to dislike, I finally understood something. Vincent Moretti had never bought the building because he wanted to own it. He bought it because he could not bear to lose what it represented. The only question left was why that mattered so much to him. The answer arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. Not through a dramatic revelation. Not through some hidden document. Just a conversation on the roof of the building that had somehow become the center of both our lives. The city stretched around us beneath a clear blue sky. Cars moved through distant streets. Church bells echoed somewhere across the neighborhood. For a few minutes neither Vincent nor I spoke. We simply stood beside the railing overlooking the community that had connected us long before either of us realized it. "My father trusted you," I finally said. Vincent nodded slowly. "He did. And you spent all these years protecting something he cared about." I tried. I looked at him. "Why?" For the first time since I had known him, Vincent seemed to search for the right words. "Because your father gave me something when very few people would." "What?" A faint smile appeared. "A chance." The answer felt surprisingly simple. Most people saw headlines, rumors, assumptions. He glanced toward the skyline. "Your father saw a person." I felt emotion tightening in my chest. He would have liked hearing that. Vincent laughed softly. "I hope so." The wind carried silence between us again. Comfortable silence this time. The kind that no longer demanded explanations. Then Vincent reached into his coat and handed me a folder. "What is this?" "Open it." I did. Inside were ownership documents, financial statements, property records. First, none of it made sense. Then my eyes reached the final page. I looked up immediately. "Vincent." "Keep reading." My heart began racing. The document outlined a long-term preservation plan for the building, resident protections, business protections, community funding. But one detail stood above everything else. The Future Management Authority listed a name. "Mine." "You are giving me control?" I asked. "If you want it." I stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Vincent's expression remained calm. "Because you understand what this place means better than I ever could. That is a huge responsibility." "I know. You trust me with all of this?" "Completely." The words landed with more force than any grand declaration ever could. For weeks I had expected hidden motives, conditions, expectations. Yet standing there, I realized Vincent was offering the one thing powerful people rarely offered anyone. A choice. No pressure. No obligation. Just trust. I looked down at the documents again, then back at him. "You know," I said, "when I first met you, I was convinced you were the last person I would ever trust." Vincent smiled. "I remember. I was not very subtle. Not even slightly." I laughed for what felt like the first time in days. The city shimmered around us in the afternoon sunlight. Below, residents moved in and out of the building. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. The bookstore sign swayed gently above the entrance. Life continued exactly as it should. Preserved. Protected. Home. "My father always said something," I told him. "What was that?" I smiled. "The strongest people are not the ones who take control. They are the ones who know when to give it away." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. He was a wise man. Standing beside him, I finally understood the truth. Vincent Moretti had purchased the building. He had repaired it, protected it, saved it, but he had never tried to own the people inside it. And somehow that mattered more than anything else. Because in the end, the reason I stayed was not because of his power. It was because he never asked me to surrender mine.